Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Monday, April 1st, and today is the 178th day since the attacks by Hamas on southern Israel. I've been giving daily updates since October 7th, and I encourage you to look at our website for our statements or to look at past updates to see what's happened every day since October 7th. In the United States, over the past 24 to 48 hours, the Biden administration is close to approving the sale of as many as 50 American-made F-15 fighter jets to Israel. It's reported that this deal could be worth more than $18 billion, according to people familiar with the matter. CNN reported yesterday, it was Easter Sunday for those of us who are Christian and on the Western calendar, but it was reported yesterday by CNN that the Republican representative Tim Walberg insisted that he was speaking metaphorically when he appeared to suggest that the bombs that should be dropped on Gaza, like Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and to get it over quickly, that he was not referring to dropping an atomic bomb on Gaza. Walberg represents Southern Michigan. He was speaking to constituents in a town hall on March 25th. He made a World War II era reference about U.S. atomic strikes against Japan as he called for ending U.S. aid to Gaza. U.S. Democratic lawmakers and U.S. human rights organizations have expressed concern that intelligence shared with Israel contributes to civilian deaths of civilians in Gaza, according to a Wall Street Journal report. In Gaza, the Israeli Defense Forces said that they struck a Palestinian Islamic Jihad command center in the courtyard of the Al-Aqsa Hospital in central Gazan city of Deir al-Balah. And the UK government has received legal advice that Israel is breaking international humanitarian law in Gaza, but that they have refused to confirm it publicly. Commons Foreign Affairs Committee Chairwoman Alicia Kearns, a senior Tory MP, has claimed in the news. Yesterday, in his Easter Sunday sermon, Pope Francis made renewed calls for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza and the release of all Israeli hostages. We are in alignment at Churches for Middle East Peace with him in that call. Israeli forces in Gaza have withdrawn from Al-Shifa Hospital. They have had a 2-week ground operation in that vicinity. Palestinians report that the hospital wards have been disabled due to the army's offensive, but that some patients remain on the site. This was also reported, I believe, by NPR this morning. The Israelis have said that they did not injure any patients. Palestinians said that several dozen patients were evacuated and other patients were wounded in those operations. The Israeli Defense Forces said that about 200 militants were killed in the operation and more than 500 were arrested, including very important officials. We do know also that top advisors of Netanyahu's government are set to meet with Jake Sullivan in virtual meetings to discuss Israel's planned offensive in Rafah, which they continue to move forward with. The death toll in Gaza is now at 32,845 Palestinians killed, with those wounded being 75,392. Escalations have continued significantly in both Lebanon and Syria, the northern border of Israel, the southern border of Lebanon. The most significant thing is that there was an attack by Israel on the Iranian consulate in Damascus in Syria. CNN has said that this could be the most dangerous escalation outside of Gaza since October, and that it puts the Middle East on the brink of an expanded war. The attack is the latest in a recent string of apparent Israeli airstrikes. We've been talking about this every day. The U.S. has also had, I've been calling them micro attacks, targeted attacks on pro-Iranian forces throughout the Middle East. But Israel, we know, has been attacking Syria. There have been dozens killed over the past week in different parts of Syria, but this was specifically the Iranian consulate in Damascus. So far, the attacks have not provoked a response outside of the scope of the months-long skirmishes on Israel's border with Lebanon, but there have been repeated threats by Iran and Hezbollah's leadership. According to CNN, Monday's incident might be the last straw. That may be an untenable position after today's strike, which has again brought the region on the brink of an expanded war. According to Haaretz, an Israeli airstrike killed Mohammad Reza Zahedi, a commander of Iran's Revolutionary Guards Quds forces in Lebanon and Syria, according to Iranian state TV. 6 people were killed in the attack on the Iranian embassy complex in Damascus, according to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. And Iran's ambassador to Syria told state TV that Tehran's response will be harsh. Israel attacked a vehicle from air in Kanin in southern Lebanon and killed a senior Hezbollah official, according to Lebanese reports as well. There was an Israeli Defense Forces. They said a soldier was lightly wounded after Hezbollah fired into northern Israel, and that the Air Force and artillery struck Hezbollah targets in southern Lebanon. In terms of the hostage ceasefire negotiations, Israeli delegations are in Cairo for negotiations with Hamas. We do know that one of the hostages, named Naama Levy, she is being held captive by Hamas in Gaza. Her family has received proof of life from their daughter as of just a few weeks ago, and that was reported by Israel's public broadcasting. The finance minister in Israel, Smotrich, said that the demand for Israel to be flexible in negotiations for a deal with Hamas makes Sinwar, one of Hamas's heads, harden his positions even more and makes the return of hostages more distant. And senior Israeli Defense Force officers who took part in the Al-Shifa hospital operation say that they found documentation relating to October 7th that was found in the hospital and might provide information about the hostages. In Israel, a 20-year-old IDF soldier was lightly wounded in a stabbing attack in the southern Israeli city of Beersheba. The assailant was a 28-year-old resident of the Israeli Bedouin city of Ra'at, and the assailant was shot and killed by security forces at the scene. Thousands of people are protesting outside of the Knesset in Jerusalem, calling for early elections, the release of hostages, and the cancellation of the Knesset recess. Prime Minister Netanyahu said Israel needs much more independent production capacity of weapons it requires, and that they need to be immune from external pressures because they need to make their own decisions. Netanyahu was supposed to go through hernia surgery yesterday, Sunday night, under general anesthesia. I don't have an update in that regard. Jewish communities around the world have donated over 5 billion shekels, or $1.35 million, to Israel since the beginning of the war. Half of it was from the Jewish Federations of North America. 3 Israelis were wounded overnight into Monday in a stabbing attack in a different southern Israeli town of Gan Yavne. The attacker, Mumin Al-Khalil, was 19, from the West Bank village of Dura, and the attacker was shot and killed. An Israeli parliament passed a law allowing the prime minister to immediately close the Qatari-backed broadcaster Al Jazeera, citing a direct threat to the country's security. I just want to make a note. If you recall, early on, and when I was in Israel in January, I was told that the news that many Israelis don't really understand what's happening in Gaza, and that even some of the Israeli officials are saying, people in Gaza are not starving, that people in Gaza are not hungry. And you may think Al Jazeera is far too left or far too liberal, but if you have right-wing and left-wing news sources, it's one of the ways that news balances it out, right? If you have different sources that have different perspectives. And so Al Jazeera being shut down in Israel, the law was passed. So we'll keep our eye on whether or not Al Jazeera actually is shut down. That law was passed today. That was in the news. There was a drone that entered Israeli territory near Eilat. That was reported today. Pro-Iranian militias in Iraq announced that they had attacked a key target in Israeli territory. So that was also in the news. There's been an uptick in cyber attacks in Israel. A relative of the Hamas Politburo chief, Ismail Haniyeh, who lives in Israel, so the relative lives in Israel, was arrested on suspicion of being in contact with Hamas members and supporting terrorism. A magistrate court extended her detention by 4 days. Her lawyer said that she was arrested with her 2 sons, who have since been released. 2 Israeli Defense Forces soldiers were killed in combat in the southern strip. Both of them were 20 years old. The Israeli Defense Forces said a man who opened fire on Israeli vehicles north of Jericho on Thursday and wounded 3 people turned himself in. I wanted to finally point you to an op-ed that was just published today that I co-authored with Dr. Ben Norquist, who's been a fellow with us. It was published in Baptist News Global, and it's called Israel's War on Gaza and Occupation Policies Are Quietly Erasing Christian Culture and Presence This Holy Season. I encourage you to read the article. It talks about the ways that worship during Palm Sunday and this last Holy Week, the way that worship was limited, permits were significantly decreased. In past years, there's been as many as 15,000 people on Palm Sunday, and it was much, much less this past Palm Sunday, for example. This year's observances were not the same in size or tone. How could it be while Christians are coping with the widespread loss of many of their families in Gaza? West Bank Palestinians have described today's realities as worse than those suffered during the Second Intifada. So I'd encourage you to take a look at that article. You can find it on CMEP's website. And we also would invite you, the global letter that was published last week that was signed by global bishops, more than 140 executive level leaders. We have opened that up for anyone to be able to sign. And so we'd invite you to sign that letter. It calls for a comprehensive ceasefire. That means the laying down of weapons by Hamas. That means the ending of the bombing by the Israeli military. It means the release of hostages that are held in Gaza. We call for a release of prisoners, who have not had due process that are being held in Israeli jails, immediate and adequate humanitarian assistance into Gaza, while we work for comprehensive solutions that will pursue both justice and peace and work to end the occupation and oppression while ensuring safety and security and freedom for Palestinians and Israelis living in the Holy Land.